Welcome, security pros. Are you ready to talk about identity based threats with our friends over from Beyond Identity today? I hope you are, because we've got a packed webinar for everyone here today. Let me first of all introduce myself, James Azar. I'm a Chief Information Security Officer, and I moderate these webinars on behalf of your favorite website, thehackernews.com. Joining me today are two very, very special people. How special are you, Lewis and Jing? How special? Like from 1 to 10,
I'm
how
very
special would you
special.
say you are?
Like pretty special, according to us.
Lewis is known as the Chief Looney Tunes Officer at Beyond Identity.
There you
So that
go.
tells you everything you need to know. But folks, let's get into our webinar today. So let me introduce Jing Rayhan and Louis Maracio. Did I say that correctly?
Outstanding. Good
Brilliant.
job.
Right. So Jing's the director of product marketing. Her claim to fame is taking integrations, API-based products to market from zero to multi-million dollars in revenue. She's also a world-renowned speaker at places like Identiverse and Authenticate. And Lewis is the new chief technology officer, correct, Lewis? New,
That's
old,
right.
new, old, new.
Yeah.
And
New, officially new.
officially new, and you do have a big claim to fame. You created the first secure remote access solution without a VPN, which became the foundation of IP telephony, remote access, and the Cisco firewall product. Is you're laughing, but am I right?
Yeah, about
Kind
20
of.
some odd years ago, the first secure remote access solution that doesn't require a
So you did
VPN
this when you
before
were
Cisco
6 years
IP
old.
phones.
You did it when you were 6 years
I
old.
do look young, don't I?
I
I
wouldn't have given you a
glow.
day over 30. You just
Keep going, man. I like it. Keep going.
All right, our audience here is going crazy in the comments. All right, I'm glad y'all are loving it. Jing, Lewis, the floor is all yours. I'll shut up. Let you take it from here.
Oh, let's do this. All right. So, hi, everyone. We are talking about possibly our favorite topic today, which is how do you actually eliminate identity-based threats, right? And these are things like phishing, brute force, 2FA bypass, man-in-the-middle, etc. So one place to start essentially is every breach starts with initial access, right? How does a breach happen? Well, somebody got access to something they weren't supposed to. And this is the latest report from Mandiant. I was just reading the CrowdStrike global threat report as well, and their findings were very similar. But essentially, initial access vectors that lead to breaches lie on the credential attack vectors and the device attack vectors, right? And as practitioners, this might not be news to you. However, the question today is, so if these things are known, how come the numbers remain the same year over year, right? How come phishing remains the #1 threat vector per Verizon DBIR year over year? How come credentials and the device lockdown is such a problem, even when we have MDMs and EDRs and all sorts of security tooling, right? So there's a real problem here. And today we're gonna assess what the actual root cause of identity-based threats are, and then we're going to provide some thoughts on solutions, right? And these are technology-based, right? I'm not here to necessarily sell you anything, although if you want to buy Beyond Identity, more power to you. But let's keep this conversation on the technical level. Let's have a good time. If you have questions, I think they can drop it in chat. Pretty sure. All right. So the first core problem when it comes to identity-based attacks is it turns out your credentials are moving, right? We authenticate users typically with shared secrets like passwords, one-time codes, and push notifications. The problem with shared secrets and movable credentials is that it exponentially increases your threat surface. And because Lewis has such a strong claim to fame in the networking space, I'm going to pass it over to him to kind of dive into what's going on there.
For sure. I mean, if you think about it, we often think TLS is this magic technology that protects us regardless, right? Hey, don't worry, you've got the pretty little lock icon. TLS is there. Anything I send over, it is completely private between me and whatever's on the other end, right? Whatever's receiving that piece of data, whether that's an email or whether that's a password. The reality is the modern internet is significantly more complicated. There's any number of points along the way where that TLS session is actually terminated and the content can be inspected. Some of these things we actually use today as security tooling, right? Some of them happen in the cloud magically to make sure, you know, the applications that we build can scale and can do everything that they need to do. But the reality is, when you have a secret, and if that secret is the part of the factor, one of the factors that's used to grant access to authenticate you, there's numerous spots between you and that authenticating website or application where that secret can be stolen. The fact of the matter is, it's not secure at all. And there's really only one way to eliminate this. If you have a shared secret, you're exposed to it, right? If you have a shared secret, or if a credential moves, fundamentally now that credential is insecure. So, you know, our first insight as a company was that, hey, if the credentials never move, they can't be stolen. Right? It's kind of obvious when you think about it. And then when you start to think about the modern hardware that we have, if you make those credentials, if you leverage the hardware you have and you make those credentials device bound, and you leverage the TPM or the Apple Secure Enclave, right? The hardware components in those devices, you can actually provide very, very strong guarantees about the credentials, about the secret material that you store in there. Right? You can create a system where you can prove that secret, right? That credential that's stored in the hardware device can never be stolen. The second component of this is that when you do that, as long as you don't add any phishable factors, as long as you only use phishing-resistant factors, you can eliminate that entire threat vector completely. It's gone, right? You don't have to worry about it anymore.
Yeah. Our CEO likes to say he has this visual of like a key behind bars, essentially showing that this key is locked down, right? And sometimes when I think about shared secrets, it doesn't just get shared on the internet. If I guess your password,
Right,
because I know your high school mascot or your birthday, then it's now shared in my brain. And it turns out the brain is a pretty efficient technology in terms of credential theft. And a lot of times phishing and brute force happens as simply as just, hey, I can guess your credential. It's easy.
right. I mean, think
right?
about, if you think about all of the vectors that go away, right? The whole notion of password spraying and stuffing, it's
Yeah.
all gone now, right? It just can't happen.
Right. You can't steal what doesn't exist.
That's right.
Yeah, it's kind of a beautifully simple concept, but when you say it out loud, it's like, oh, that's it. That's the secret sauce. Which kind of leads me to my second problem, right? The second issue around identity-based threats is that we put so much of the burden on human beings, right? Hey, human being, you're going to get trained repeatedly on how to identify a phishing email. And by the way, when you go on a login page, it's going to look exactly like the login page you're used to. Oh, and it might be a legitimate login page with a man in the browser or a man in the middle. And user, you should really keep an eye out for that, right? So similarly to kind of the shared secret thing where, you know, you put a lot of burden on this one asset, human beings as a last line of defense for security leads to a lot of problems. So we were looking into some data recently, and this is data published by KnowBe4, which is very well adopted user training for phishing. So, you know, you want to reduce users' risk of clicking on a phishing email, right? And what they found, I know this graph is a bit of a colorful,
very sophisticated looking graph.
Thank you. So essentially what you're seeing here is KnowBe4 said that on average, organizations that have gone through training have about a 10% click-through rate on phishing emails. That means 1 in 10 users who receive a phishing email actually click on it and then go through the flow, right? The below average organizations are about a 25% click rate, so 1 in 4. best-in-class organizations are at 4%. And you might think to yourself, well, 4% is pretty good, right? That's 4 in 100 clicks. However, when you do the math at scale, at about 56 attempts, that's a 90% chance of an incident. And that's how phishing attacks happen over and over again, even when organizations have multi-factor authentication set up. Because it turns out when humans are involved with making security decisions, I can't hold a high complexity, high entropy password in my mind. And I certainly can't remember it. I can't tell what's a phishing email. The other day, my company sent out a phishing email, and it was very severely worded. And it said, hey, just so you know, you used your company laptop for personal nefarious purposes. Please review our company policy on, laptop usage on work computers. And I said, oh no, I checked Instagram. But then I noticed, like the PDF doesn't look right. So I didn't click, but I was super close, right? So, and that's what happens when you rely on the human being. So we actually have an interesting demo here of what this attack looks like in the wild. If you want to walk us through it, Louis.
Yeah, I think this is a really great example, right? And what we have here is someone logging into an Okta tenant, right? Protected with Duo. You see this all the time. It's pretty standard setup. Duo push comes through, you hit approve, and of course you get logged in, right? Now, what's happening behind the scenes is this session was completely intercepted, right? That secret that moved when you typed your password in right there was stolen. And on top of that, it stole the session token, right? So now this attacker can attack at will without even having to deal with Duo. On the flip side, here's a tenant that's protected with Beyond Identity, right? This is a different Okta tenant protected with Beyond Identity. And right now what's happening is Beyond Identity's checking for credentials, checking your device posture, and it's doing origin verification. It says, hey, you know what? There's someone in the middle here. Like, I'm not going to let this through, right? Nothing was stolen. This user wasn't able to authenticate by design, and they weren't compromised, right? It's very simple when you apply that concept of having a local platform agent, right, which Beyond Identity does, combined with credentials don't move, there's nothing to steal, wrapped in phishing-resistant magic like origin verification and other things. All of a sudden, all of these attacks are completely ineffectual, regardless of what the human does. Humans are going to make mistakes. Can't ever get away from it. Doesn't matter if they make a mistake here. If they click that link, it doesn't matter. They'll be protected.
Well, I mean, just one thing to add here based on a lot of the comments too, right? Humans building it so that human, which is your weakest, typically part of, and the most susceptible part of your attack surface as being the last line of defense is flawed as a cybersecurity strategy.
I mean, that's right, because you'll never be able to get it to zero. Your users will always click.
It's only a matter of time.
And it's not because people are bad, right? I just want to put
that
out there. People are just trying to be helpful. In fact, social engineering is built on the whole fact of people trying to be very, very helpful.
That's right. And social engineering has been one of, if not the primary vectors of attack for, since the dawn of computers, right?
Well, since the dawn of human age.
That's right.
The first James Bond movie, before there was a computer, he would social engineer his way to the best parties, right?
There you go.
The Sean Connery days. I mean, I may be aging myself here a bit because Lois is 26 and James is 19, but
that's right.
But Sean Connery days.
For sure. And it's fundamentally unfair, right? So to ask our employees, to ask our coworkers to be perfect, especially when it comes to a cybersecurity context, it's just unfair. And especially when we have the technology where they don't have to be perfect.
Right. And if you look at how these attacks are being executed, it's sneaky. the landing page looks like Okta's login page. The login request via push notification looks legitimate. So ultimately, that leads us to our second insight, which is
That's right.
You can't put human beings up against the war against machines. You have to protect them with technology that exists today that actually delivers phishing-resistant MFA, delivers verifier impersonation resistance, which is actually looking at the origin of the access request and saying, hey, like, is this the correct origin? If not, we're going to deny the access request, right? And then ultimately having the machines execute the secure authentication protocol instead of human beings who honestly just want to get to work and do a good job and go home and eat a nice dinner, So let humans live and be productive. All right. Now we come to our third insight here. And this third one is interesting because it gets at a point that is a little bit more nuanced, right? I think most people have an intuitive understanding of, hey, like if a secret is shared, it's no longer a secret. Humans are not necessarily reliable as your last line of defense. But the last core issue is there are gaps in coverage for MFA and phishing-resistant MFA, right? So if you deployed hardware security keys as your kind of phishing-resistant MFA method, do you deploy it to executives? Like some executives have MFA exception rules. Additionally, there's MFA, especially the phishing-resistant variety, that don't support Linux, Chrome OS, virtual machines, etc. So you're only as strong as your weakest link, and you need to make sure that whatever phishing-resistant MFA you deploy can be deployed universally across any device, any operating system, any environment, really, for that full-scale coverage. Again, attackers, like the rest of us, like to take the path of least resistance. We like the easy way out. It's easier, and that's why credentials remain the #1 sort of attack vector for initial access, right? So make sure all of your points of entry are protected. So that, you might have your front door locked down, lock your garage door, lock your windows, right?
Yep.
Fairly simple concept. And this is something that was really interesting. I looked into this while putting the presentation together, and it turns out attackers do think a lot like defenders, right? They do understand that, hey, Linux and mobile devices, especially unmanaged ones, are easy targets. And so you see kind of like a massive increase in cyber attacks that really hone in on those sort of access gaps, which, makes sense because oftentimes they're under protected, right? And it's all linked. If you want to check out the references, you can, some interesting stuff. So, our third insight is basically, you have to not just think about the human being that logs in, it's their device. Make sure that you have universal phishing resistant coverage across all of your endpoints, whatever it's being used in your fleet. There's been a real influx on Chrome OS devices for frontline workers, student population, etc. You better make sure those are covered too. And in addition, we talked a lot about the credential. I do want to emphasize, now that we're on our sort of third insight, that the device posture also matters, right? Something our customers say a lot is, I can protect identities all day. And then if one device is compromised and that device doesn't have disk encryption, doesn't have firewall, whatever it is, then all that effort for nothing, right? So as part of what it means to deliver strong authentication, we also have this concept that you really should be evaluating the device posture prior to authenticating. And I think Lewis not only has a demo for us, sort of putting all of this together, but probably has some thoughts on just the importance of device posture based on our prior conversations.
I mean, without a doubt, there's a couple of things I want to add here that I think are important. First of all, Linux users need love too. As a Linux user, right? You've got to go and make sure you have that coverage like we do here. But it's also important to think about, like, where else do the identity problems start to show up, right? You've got thousands of developers, and every time they commit code, they're participating in an identity transaction. They're writing some code and they're committing it to your repository. How do you know it was actually them? How do you know that code came from a device that was actually secure and stable and met your device posture guidelines, right? So these identity problems and the need to think about authenticating beyond just the point of access or authorization, actually, the identity problem that we've started to see exploited, the identity threat we started to see exploited is now moved into the collaboration layer, into the business layer, right? Social engineering over Zoom to get someone to transfer some money. That's fundamentally an identity problem. How do I trust that person or that image that I see? And when you have device-bound credentials, you can actually then make provable statements that, hey, I might not be able to tell you that that video is actually James asking me to transfer $15 million to his offshore Bahamian bank account. But I can at least say it's coming from his device and someone with James's credential authenticated, right? What about when I'm committing code? How do I know that that developer actually was the one that committed the code? So the identity problem is extending beyond into the business now. And then you have to start to think about how does that relate then to your device fleet, right? We live in this world where you have managed and unmanaged devices. Think about it as if you were at the airport. When I get on an airplane, they don't just scan my boarding pass, right? They also check me. They check all of my luggage. I go through a metal detector or whatever it is they have there these days. So when someone authenticates into your system, we want to make sure their device is healthy and meets the policy parameters that you've specified, right? Do they have disk encryption? Do they have CrowdStrike ZTA score of whatever, right? We'll look at some of this stuff when we jump into the demo here briefly. But it's very important to look at it holistically and have a view not just beyond, the most basic improvement is go beyond Windows and Mac to Linux, but then you go to the device and then to start to think about the identity transactions that happen beyond the authentication and authorization point.
And we know that different attackers, by the way, have different capabilities for different operating systems. So whether it be Linux or Windows or Mac OS, I mean, folks here that have been in previous webinars with the Hacker News have seen this. As you know, what Lewis is talking about is really common, where you'll see a threat actor group that's really good at Linux, will identify Linux devices and target their users very, very effectively. And that's why they become really large scale over time.
Yeah.
For sure. All right. So just to sum it up, and then we can go see how this works in a fun demo. When you think about solving the problem of identity-based attacks, what you really want to do is you want to grab the problem by the root and eradicate it from the root, right? You don't want to layer on more factors, more password complexity, more whatever, when the root of the problem hasn't been eradicated, right? So you really want to get to the root causes. And that's a three-step sort of solution, right? One, you want credentials that don't move. Those asymmetric cryptographies with private keys have to be secured in hardware, because then you get all of these really great security properties like tamper-proof, hardware protection, attestation, etc. And then it turns out when you have good security, you can also make life easier for human beings. I don't have to stare and squint at a URL anymore. That's wonderful. I just get on with my day and do more webinars for more cool people. And then, of course, you want to make sure everyone, everyone in your directory and every device in your fleet are protected, right? Because that level of coverage is the only way that you can keep attackers out of your environment. So without further ado, let's see this in action.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and bring that up, and we'll get the screen here set up for all of y'all for the live demo. By the way, we're 24 minutes, and I believe, Lewis, this is about 10 minutes, the demo?
Yeah, 5-10 minutes.
5-10.
Yeah.
So
let me know when you see my screen.
I do see your screen. I'm going to bring it up here in just a minute. But before I do that, because we're 24 minutes in, if you do have to drop at the bottom half of the hour at the 30-minute mark, because of whatever, the rest of this webinar is available on demand at thehackernews.com/webinar. So if you do have to drop in the middle of the demo, you can still catch it after the fact. So hackernews.com/webinars. It's available on demand there. Lewis, let's
All right.
get you there.
So
Just a second here. We're having a little
Okay.
technical difficulty. There we go. Floor is all yours.
good to go? All right, cool. So what we're looking at here is just briefly is the login to the Beyond Identity administration console. When I click my passkey here to log in, you'll see that Beyond Identity is asking me to prove that I own that credential, that I have it. In this particular case, I'm going to go ahead and use the biometric prompt. And what has happened there behind the scenes is policy is run against my device and in the cloud to check that I'm on a device that meets the policy characteristics that are defined, that I have possession of the credential that's being used to log in, and that possession in that particular case was verified using the biometric prompt because we're accessing the Apple Secure Enclave, performing a signing operation, all kinds of wonderful asymmetric cryptographic stuff. The long and the short of it is what you end up with is a really seamless kind of streamlined passwordless experience. I didn't punch in a username, I didn't punch in a password, but I got all the protection of secure, phishing-resistant multi-factor authentication. So just to take a quick tour, I think it's important to point out really the heart of what we do is in policy. And this is a demo system, but there's a couple of sample policies set up. And policy is where the administrator gets to define the risks they're willing to take or not take effectively. In other words, what do I want to verify to be true before I let anybody in? Or what do I want to detect? And if I do detect it, absolutely deny authentication from happening. In our world, we have customers with hundreds of policy rules, right? But just to give you an idea of what it might look like to add a new policy rule. So if I was, let's say I wanted to protect Linux users specifically, and I wanted to make sure that Linux users had certain characteristics, right? Let's just write, I'm gonna write, this is the Lewis's Linux rule. I'm gonna say this is for the authentication transaction. Now, in this case, I can check, for example, how many registered devices they have. I can check whether they're in a particular group, et cetera. So I'm gonna say, hey, my contract developers, let's see, right? You have access to numerous attributes. You can also define your own attributes. We'll look very briefly at that. You can define your own attributes based on queries that you can run against the devices during authentication. So I'm going to say my contract developers always use Linux. Like if they don't use Linux, something's wrong, for example. Now, integrations are really important, right? Every one of you has a robust investment in the ecosystem of cyber, the cybersecurity ecosystem. You've got EDRs, you've got SIEMs, you've got all this wonderful stuff. With Beyond Identity, you can integrate with those products and you can pull that data in to include it as part of context so that you can use it as part of the authentication decision, right? So in this particular case, in this particular system, we've got a couple of integrations defined. We'll look at that briefly as well. But let's say I want to do some CrowdStrike stuff, right? So first of all, CrowdStrike has to be available. We'll say, hey, it's true. Second of all, I'm going to say CrowdStrike, you know what? I know that, for example, in CrowdStrike, like full disk access has to be enabled for it to work, right? For it to do its job. So I'm going to go ahead and turn that on. And finally, I'm going to say, hey, the ZTA score, the overall ZTA score, like these guys have to be like, let's say 90, just round numbers. So I can build really robust policy. I can include location information. I can include attributes like impossible travel. And then I can say, hey, I'm going to allow, I'm going to monitor, or I'm going to deny. Deny is straightforward. That means they won't be accessed if these criteria were met. Now, when I allow, I can say, hey, I want to allow, and I actually want to force them to use biometric verification. In other words, I might know for a fact that all of my Linux users have laptops. They all have biometric capabilities. They should be using biometrics to access it. So as you can see, you can build very specific policy to specifically, in a very fine-grained way, allow or deny access to your system.
Hey,
Now,
Lewis,
I
can you
mentioned,
show us some of those endpoint attributes, like for Windows or for Linux?
yeah.
So go
You're
to
talking about,
device platform. Yeah, because
yeah.
these are our standard sort of
Sorry,
out of the
I didn't
box
go
ones.
down deeper. Yeah, so there's some standard ones out of the box, for example, on Linux. On Windows, you've got another set that you can say. So you can, for example, assert that antivirus is enabled. You could also assert that the firewall is on, right? So you can build very detailed policy about, to reach down into the device, to look at the device posture, right? And what this really allows you to do too, over time, configuration drift is a big problem, right? And so this allows you to make assertions about what you know must be true, and when it's not true, you want to be able to detect that and fix it, right? So if someone over time has found a way to turn their firewall off, hey, maybe we just won't let them access their system anymore. When they call the help desk, we'll be able to sort them out. Now, let's look one other place here at what we call device queries. So devices in our system are, we're first-class citizens, right? So in this particular system, there's one device defined, which is my Mac, and you want to be able to see lots of information about that device over time, right? It's important, for example, to be able to respond and be very flexible when new exploits occur, or when you want to assert that someone's got specific software installed, or that they don't have SSH keys that are unencrypted on their system, or whatever it may be. With our device query capabilities, you can build queries that run that will define attributes for you, and then these attributes, right? For example, unencrypted SSH key, which is coming from this query here, right? That runs against the devices that are authenticating into your system, can be used as part of your policy. That's an important component when you're thinking about building not just static policy, but policy that's going to be able to be evolve and respond quickly. So when the next 0-day exploit happens and you get that phone call from your boss that says, are we vulnerable to this? You can say yes or no, but more importantly, you can say, but don't worry, I've put a policy rule in so nobody can authenticate if they have that problem right now. The final thing I'll point out is I'm going to jump over here to integrations. I mentioned integrations are important. Our integration library is large. We've got integrations kind of with numerous systems. And in each one, when you go in and you look at them, you'll get detailed documentation. But more importantly, again, back to that data, all of the data that is available from that integration is defined here. And like, for example, in the case of CrowdStrike, there's 88 attributes you might be able to pull from that investment you have in CrowdStrike to use as part of your policy that you define. What have I forgotten, Jing? I'm sure I've forgotten something.
Oh, we could sit here and demo all day. I think you've covered the important stuff, right? Integrations,
Cool.
policy,
Okay.
attributes. Yeah. Anything you want to
Awesome.
see, James?
No, I've seen it. I mean, I think we can keep going, but I know we're getting short on time, and so I want to be mindful of that as well.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that would stand out from a demo perspective that you think would give beyond? Let me ask you this: what would give Beyond Identity the edge in terms of
So
what the platform offers?
Yeah. So like, look, our device posture and our device device boundness is really, really, really fundamentally important, and it's a fundamental differentiator. But let me flip over just a little bit and say, as we think about the threat landscape, we know one thing. We know the attackers evolve over time. So we feel really confident, right, that we've solved, for example, the credential problem. If you use us, your credentials are going to be stored in a way such that they cannot be stolen, right? You're going to be protected from accidentally clicking that phishing link. Nothing bad is going to happen if your humans make a mistake. But the attackers evolve, right? So once you've solved man in the middle, where are they going next? Well, if someone's on your machine, right, if they've accessed your machine and stolen that session token, they can still kind of go use it somewhere else. So when you think about how do we evolve to protect our customers over time, so we have an SSO built in to our product, right? So when I click here, you'll see kind of an SSO dashboard, and there's two things that I'll point out. One is, you want to be able to build, application specific policy, right? So you want to be able to make sure that when I build a policy rule, I can say, hey, I want to allow this specifically for the legal data room application, right? So my legal team, for example, and then I can build very specific application policy. But the other thing that's really important that I'll hint at here, since these folks have sat with us for about 30 minutes, is now what happens if we can now protect that session token and tie that session token to that device, right? If we can make it a device-bound session token too, right? So those are the kinds of things, those are the kinds of innovations that we're adding to the platform, because we know that as we push that frontier, those attackers aren't just going to sit still, right? They're going to push too. And so our goal is to not just stay in front of them, but to stay in front of them in a provable way, to stay in front of them in a way that's deterministic and not probabilistic, right? Because we saw what happens when you have when you use probabilistic solutions, right? If you rewind back to what Jing mentioned about the 4% click-through rate, well, 4% click-through rate, when you try enough times, eventually someone's going to get through. So we like to depend on deterministic protection in a way that allows our customers to specifically define the risks that they're willing to take through policy, so that they know exactly what's going on and only allow exactly the people or the exact identities into the system with the exact posture that they know that they expect, right? So it's all about deterministic solutions that push the frontier, and so that's really where we're going.
I love it. Anything else y'all want to add here? I know we're at time, so just going to be mindful of that.
I'm
Lois,
good.
No, that was
Jane?
good.
I want
Well,
to thank all these folks for sitting with us and listening to me ramble
they
on.
did, and for all the Q&A folks, I know we didn't get a chance to get to Q&A. Those are in our inbox. Someone from Beyond Identity will be answering all of those questions that y'all actually put into the Q&A section of today's webinar. So just keep that in mind. Thank you all for tuning in. Jing, Lewis, thank you so much for coming on. This was really, really amazing. And thank you to everyone here for watching today. We really do appreciate y'all. If you have any additional topics you want to hear from us here at the Hacker News, please make sure to go and check it out and letting us know by going to thehackernews.com/webinars. Until next time, have a great rest of your day, everyone. And most importantly, stay cyber safe.
Thank you.